What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Redonkulous Gaming. We're back with another Protection Warrior video. This time we are featuring Bastion, the Kyrian ability, which is Spear of Bastion. Before I jump into breaking down exactly what the heck Spear of Bastion is for the Warrior class, let's first talk about the signature ability, which is Summon Steward. I really want to call this one out specifically because it is so freaking strong in terms of the utility that you're bringing yourself as well as your group, regardless of what you're doing, because of the File Serenity that your Summon Steward brings you. This is the potion that you can drink, which restores 20% of your health, which is not the sexy part, and removes all curse, disease, poison, and bleed effects. That's the sexy part. And you get a stack of 3 of those, and then all of a sudden, you run out, you call your steward back 5 minutes later, and you've got those right back there. So you're essentially bringing something into your warrior toolkit that you don't have, and that's the ability to remove all curse, disease, poisons, and bleed effects that are on you. It really helps out the healer, really gives the group a lot more utility, because you can tell your healer, hey, don't worry about cleansing me, I got it myself. And as a tank, and speaking from tanks who have had the ability to cleanse themselves in the past, it really helps the healer to be able to focus their attention on the rest of the group, and it's certainly not something that can be ignored. So Summon Steward becomes actually very strong for classes like Warrior and DK that do not have cleanse in their baseline toolkit, and cleanses all those negative effects on themselves, even if they're stacked up. So very, very strong signature ability. And it's something that is granted to all classes that join the Kyrian Covenant. So quick shout out to Summon Steward, because that Swolkin's pretty darn powerful with his buffs and his potions that he's given you as a warrior. Now, as far as Spear of Bastion, if you have not seen my videos in the past, I really try to evaluate each of the class Covenant abilities with really 3 criteria. The first of which, how does an ability feel? Is it something that's fun? Is it something that enhances the overall toolkit? Or is it something that sucks and needs a lot of work? What's the ability strength? Is it something that is flat out strong, maybe too weak, something that needs tweaking in terms of strength? What is it? And then lastly, the viability. I pick my Covenant and Covenant abilities strictly based off of the ability to do more than one type of content. And by that, I mean as a PvE player, I want to be running Torghast, Mythic Plus, and Raid on a weekly basis, and I want my Covenant ability to be able to complement my ability to do all 3 of those pieces of content without really feeling punished for doing so. So, Spear of Bastion, let's just jump right in. Spear of Bastion is where you throw a spear at a targeted location. It's going to deal a percentage of attack power as arcane damage, and then it'll also put a dot based on your attack power over the period of 4 seconds. It's going to deal damage to 5 targets at a flat rate line. And the second you go over 5 targets, though, you're going to have some diminishing returns. So keep that in mind, is that after 5 targets, you'll have diminishing returns on the damage that you're doing with your Spear of Bastion. That is one thing that some of you may or may not like. I did not particularly enjoy that, mainly because I was looking for some form of utility outside of just flat-out throughput that this brought me as a Protection Warrior, and quite frankly, it is lacking. The one thing that you can say that this gives you from a utility perspective is the ability to tether the mobs to that location. So the second they run out of your Spear of Bastion radius, they're going to be pulled right back in while Spear of Bastion is up. So this will be something that you can use to kind of move your enemies around a little bit, kind of like Sigil of Chains, depending on where you place it, as long as you're placing it in an area where, for example, if you're casting Spear of Bastion on a group of mobs that has a spellcaster in it, if you place Spear of Bastion so that the outside, the circumference area of the circle is just kind of bordering the caster, it'll tether them in and yank them back in towards the center, and that'll act as an interrupt. So that's the main utility that it's bringing you as a tank. to the point where it kind of can bring you an extra interrupt as long as it's used correctly, and that's the big asterisk there, is that it needs to be used correctly. I often actually found that I was pulling with Spear of Bastion more so than using it as anything else, simply because I've got Spell Reflect, and I don't necessarily want those spells to be interrupted because I can just reflect them back. I also felt as though Spear of Bastion just did not give me more than just the ability to kind of keep control over mobs, because as I mentioned, after you scale beyond those 5 targets, you're actually not seeing tremendous value from Spear of Bastion in terms of the overall damage. You get the diminishing returns beyond 5 targets. So as a result, despite the fact that you were doing significant damage to the original targets, when it goes over 5, you're going to be doing less damage to them. You'll still be doing more damage overall because you're dealing damage to more than 5 targets, but just keep in mind it's not going to be nearly as much. It's really good in terms of grabbing initial threat and keeping threat because it does do so much damage. So that's why I ended up using Spear of Bastion more as a way in which to gain initial aggro over maybe larger trash pulls, or just in general if I wanted to keep aggro and I knew it was a tougher group to kind of wrangle, or the mobs that fixate, and there are a lot of them in the Shadowlands dungeons. There's a lot of trash packs that they have fixating mobs, and opening with the Spear of Bastion makes it so that you gain initial control over that group to the point in which you can AoE a bunch of them down, and that way it's a lot less frustrating for the group to have to deal with the fixating ads. So a couple of different ways that you can use Spear of Bastion, but overall the utility for tank is lacking. We'll just put it that way. Now, in terms of how it felt to play with, I felt like it was a pretty darn fun ability. I really liked everything that it did in the dungeon setting, but beyond that, when it comes to like single target fights, and I have to, as I think about this for raiding, I feel as though beyond it being just a great way to increase your overall damage and therefore threat generation on a boss, it doesn't bring a lot to the party beyond that, because again, the tethering won't work on a boss. A boss isn't gonna move and then immediately get pulled back to where you threw your Spear of Bastion. That's not how it's going to work. And so because of that, it has the most value, brings the most value to trash. So this is yet another trash hero Covenant ability. There's a number of them for all 6 tanks out there, but this one in general just feels a little lacking. And I think what Blizzard needs to do, and this is where I start to talk about, despite the fact that this is a fun ability, it needs a little something else for tanks, and they need to kind of think about Spear of Bastion if you're not playing Fury, if you're not playing Arms, because protection, there's nothing there that screams, I'm a prot warrior, and I really need Spear of Bastion because it brings me X, Y, and Z, because it doesn't. It doesn't. It just does damage, and that's it. The tethering is cool, but even if I look at the Necrolord ability for DK, this is a great example. The Abomination Limb that they gave DK, the original iteration of that, all it did was pull mobs into you once every second, and they just recently added for Blood DK the ability to add Bone Shield stacks. And as of right now, while that's still weak, it's at least more than what it originally was, which is just flat-out damage plus quote-unquote tethering. So exactly the same thing as Spear of Bastion. The only difference is that if you're a Blood DK running Abomination Limb, you are the tether. Everything is tethered to you, versus for a warrior Spear of Bastion, the spear becomes the tether, and you kind of have to work around wherever you throw the spear to make sure you're taking advantage of the tethering. But without something else in the toolkit, like they need to add something that's specific to, if you're a protection warrior, you get this. Whatever this is, maybe it's, I don't know, while it's up and you're standing in the radius, you can relentlessly spam Revenge for free. Something like that. Or, a flat-out damage, mitigation. Even if they do something like what they did with this sigil for Demon Hunters, where it gives you the ability to do a little bit more self-healing. Something that adds either your ability to sustain, so self-healing, or the ability to mitigate. Even if it's something as like 5% mitigation while it's up, that's something that would actually work pretty darn well in a single target fight as well as a group fight too. So it would be great if they just kind of added in the, you know, for this spec you also get this, and for this spec you also get this, because right now this one jumps off as the warrior ability that just needs the most attention because it just does not do enough for protection warriors to really consider taking it. It's pretty strong in terms of the damage that it does, but beyond that you need a little bit more to choose Kyrian over any of the other covenants right now, just because the other covenants bring more utility to the group, whether that's a Mythic Plus, whether that's Torghast, or whether that's a raid. It just does more than just straight out damage. So I'm really hoping that Spear of Bastion is something that gets fixed sooner rather than later, because I do think it needs fixing. It cannot go live this way, or there's going to be a lot of people scratching their head as to why protection warriors who main protection as their primary spec are even choosing this ability, because it just doesn't bring you enough outside of that tether. And that tether, while it's pretty darn cool, is not anything that's unique or specific to the warrior. It's something that you're seeing, as I already mentioned, Abomination Limb for Death Knights. That's something that is, you know, not necessarily unique to the warrior, the tethering. So this is a fun ability because it's pretty darn neat. It's got a cool aesthetic to it. The spell graphic itself is pretty cool. It's very thematic. You can tell someone's rolling Kyrian with it. All the things that Blizzard was going for. But when I look at the strength of the ability, all I can say that I'm getting is extra damage. And the tethering is just kind of like it's not up even long enough to notice the tether half the time. It's up for a very short period of time. So despite the fact you get that tether is not very strong because the spear is not up long enough for it to even really take effect. Like Abomination Limb is up for 12 seconds or something like that. And this is like a 4-second tether. So it's not enough for me. In terms of viability, I already kind of mentioned this a little bit. The ability is not good single target at all, because all it is, you know, it's another way to get threat on your target. You don't really need a lot of help getting threat on your target. As a warrior, you're putting out pretty good damage right now. Revenge is hitting pretty freaking hard. Shield Slam is doing its thing. You're going to be filling everything with Devastates, and then you're going to execute when the targets are low. So you have enough damage dealers in your toolkit to the point where this needs a little bit more to, I don't know, to just give you more than just damage. I still keep coming back to the tethering, and I think about, you know, raid fights specifically, or boss fights in Mythic Plus, and the single target encounters is just, you know, like this doesn't do anything for me as a protection warrior. Spear of Bastion just needs some work, and I really hope that they take a long hard look at this and they say, okay, we need to do a buff specific to the spec that you're in to make sure that you know, people actually want to pick this ability for more than just the sole purpose of PvP. Because as of right now, this looks like a PvP ability to me, where you're just trying to piss off and troll other player characters by tethering them to a location or keeping them out of a fight or making them LOS their healer around a pillar or something like that. Like that's useful. The problem is that Blizzard, of course, put themselves in this position where they have to balance this ability for PvE and PvP and make it viable. And they're either going to have to increase the uptime of the spear itself so that you can actually notice the tether and it does a little bit more for you in terms of PvE, or they're going to have to add a spec-specific buff for Arms Fury and Prot to make it more worth your while to go this route right now. So overall, I think this is going to be functioning just fine for Torghast. It's going to be functioning just fine for Mythic Plus to a certain extent. Like, it's going to have its limitations in Mythic Plus, don't get me wrong. But at least on Trash, it's not going to be too bad, especially since it's only a 1-minute cooldown. That's kind of the silver lining about this thing, is that you're not overly punished with a crazy long, like 3-minute cooldown like you are with Conqueror's Banner. So you can use this a little bit more rotationally. I mean, even if they did some minor tweaks and they made this thing like a 45-second cooldown or a 30-second cooldown, I think there's a few routes that Blizzard can go. You know, reducing the cooldown, adding a spec-specific buff, and then overall increasing the duration in which Spear of Bastion is up for, because it's there and gone so quickly to the point where you barely even notice that you even hit the button. So a couple of things. I really hope Blizzard tweaks this thing sooner rather than later. We will see how well this video ages, but I'd love to know your thoughts as well, simply because it's pretty darn underwhelming for me overall when I look at it. So would love to know if any of you have played with the ability, or what your thoughts were just kind of based on reading the tooltip, because after playing with this thing for a while, I came to a very clear decision that this would be not on my list as a protection warrior to even really consider. So it's not in my top 3, which tells you, hey, it's dead last right now. But let me know your thoughts.